When Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany in 1933, he quickly began enacting anti-Jewish laws. He had long blamed the Jews for Germany's defeat in World War I and the subsequent years of hardship. To Hitler, they were the enemy that threatened his dream of supreme German nationalism. By 1935, Jews were stripped of German citizenship, refused education. Their businesses were openly boycotted by the Nazi Party. Storefronts branded with the Star of David to prevent patronage. They were effectively outcast. Hundreds of thousands fled.
The plight of Jewish children driven from Germany has stirred the sympathy and conscience of the rest of the world. Here is the first group arriving at Harwich.
But soon, the prospects for refuge would wither. Surrounding countries, worried about an overflow of immigration, tightened their borders. A dilemma Hitler counteracted by forcibly expelling foreign-born Jews. In October 1938, thousands of Polish-born Jews were arrested and deported from Germany. Among them were the parents of Herschel Goischepan. The 17-year-old was living in Paris at the time, and upon hearing about the treatment of his mother and father, he plotted revenge. On November 7th, 1938, he walked into the office of Ernst von Rath, a Nazi German diplomat, and shot him twice in the stomach. Roth died 2 days later, and when word reached Berlin, leaders in the Nazi Party saw an opportunity to strike. In a fiery speech, Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels encouraged anti-Semitic demonstrations, and on the night of November 9th, 1938, Nazi mobs took to the streets. Rioters targeted Jewish homes, stores, schools, hospitals, and synagogues. Buildings were torched and windows smashed. German firemen and police were ordered to stand down. The violence would carry over into another day, and by the time it was over, dozens of Jewish citizens were dead, hundreds of synagogues burned, and thousands of Jewish businesses destroyed. In the days that followed, the Nazis would blame the Jewish community for the damage done, instituting a fine exceeding $5 billion in today's money. Meanwhile, 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and deported to concentration camps, and the businesses that were destroyed were banned from ever reopening again. This was no longer harassment. It was directed violence. Violence that would grow more sadistic in the ensuing years, spiraling into one of the worst atrocities in human history. For the Jews of Germany, and soon the Jews of Europe, by the end of 1938, the shadows of hate had begun their march, and the only light left to flicker were the flames still leaping from the charred remains that an oppressed people once called home.
It's burning, brothers, it's burning. Oh, our poor people, brother, it burns. Evil winds full of anger, ravage and rage, smash and shatter. Stronger now the wild flames grow. All around now burns. You stand there looking on with futile folded arms, and you stand there looking on while our village burns. It's burning, brothers, it's burning. Oh, our poor village, brothers, it burns. Soon the rapid tongues of fire will consume each house entire as the wild wind blows and howls, the whole town up in flames. And you stand there looking on with futile folded arms, and you stand there looking on while our village burns. It's burning, brothers. Our town is burning. Oh, God forbid the moment should arrive that our town, with us together, should go up in ash and fire, leaving the slaughter's end, charred and empty walls. And you stand there looking on with futile, folded arms. And you stand there looking on while our village burns. It's burning, brothers. Our town is burning, and our salvation hangs on you alone. If our town is dear to you, Grab the buckets, douse the fire, douse it with your very blood. Show that you know how. Don't stand there, brothers, looking on with futile folded arms. Don't stand there, brothers. Douse the fire. Our poor village burns.
Mordechai Gebeltig was a Jewish folk writer and singer who wrote about the lives of everyday Jews of Krakow. In 1936, in response to a violent pogrom, he composed this song that came to be one of the folk anthems of the ghetto. Unser Städtel brennt. Our town is burning. This song became an anthem of the underground resistance in Krakow during the Nazi occupation.
On the night of the 9th to 10th of November 1938, Jewish communities across Germany and Austria were attacked in an event known as Kristallnacht, Night of Broken Glass. In just 2 days, hundreds of synagogues were burned, thousands of Jews were arrested, and around 100 Jews were killed. Any illusions that Jews could even be tolerated in Germany were finally laid to rest.
The following are some of the memories of German and Austrian Jews who experienced Kristallnacht. Hannela Zerndover was an 11-year-old girl who lived in Germany. Hannela remembers.
It must have been 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning when suddenly I was ripped out of my sleep by a sound of smashing crockery and glass. A chair hurled into the wardrobe mirror. Glass flying everywhere. Now fear became a living thing. Fear of the life and safety of my parents, who represented my own safety. My mother's cherished collection of old china cups, all shapes and sizes, from many countries, not one was left unbroken. Furnishings were slashed, old oak and walnut tables and chairs were legless, carpets were hacked, curtains torn down, floorboards splintered, and many windows smashed. With the cold black night crowding in, it had all been well organized.
Gisela Golumbek was 5 years old and went to school on the morning of November 10th, 1938. She remembers that there was a big commotion in her classroom and her principal told the Jewish students to go home.
All along the way, it appeared to me that the city was on fire. Then we passed the big synagogue and it was burning. I couldn't believe my eyes. The city wasn't burning, just the Jewish businesses, synagogues, department stores. The people came and ransacked everything. There was vile language splattered all over the buildings. Windows of stores had been knocked down, and wherever merchandise had been on the shelves, it was now on the street, and people were taking it away. I was in absolute terror. I didn't know what to do.
Ursula Rosenfeld, a Jewish girl, was 13 years old. She remembers that she was in her classroom when she heard strange noises and saw flames shooting up into the sky. All the children dashed outside, and she saw some of her neighbors' possessions had been thrown out onto the street.
It was terrifying. They had thrown all their belongings out into the street, broken things. A little child's pram was bashed to pieces, a doll, and then suddenly 2 people in uniform came out with the Torah. They were dancing in the street. It sort of had little bells on it, and they thought it was very funny. They were shaking these bells, and people were laughing and shouting. And then they saw me, and then they said, "There's another Jew. Let's throw her into the flames too." And it was a moment in my life I shall never forget.
Susan Newlander Faulkner, who was 17 during the Kristallnacht pogrom, said,
I was walking over the sidewalk with glass crunching under my feet. On the next street, the oldest synagogue in Berlin was in flames. The entire sidewalk across from the synagogue was a carnival, to the onlookers applauding and laughing. Flames lighting up the sky. All I wanted was to get out. Get out.
Robert Baer, born in Berlin, Germany, was 16 years old during the Kristallnacht pogrom.
For the first time, we became scared and began to fear for our lives and didn't trust anyone. A Jew was an outcast. All the dreams we had of being part of the German people, there was nothing left that made you think you could possibly still be German.
As Ursula Rosenfeld remembers,
That was the end of my school days, really. It was also the end of my family life. I didn't realize that was the end of everything, really, as far as my childhood.
Fritz Rodek, Vienna.
There were more than 20 large synagogues in Vienna, not to mention the far more numerous smaller ones. The destruction was the work of just a few hours. In the case of each of the synagogues burning, the fire brigade was brought in, but not to put out the fire. They were there merely to prevent it from spreading to neighboring buildings.
Susan Sinclair, Nuremberg.
My youngest sister and I shared a big room, and I saw that her bed was full of glass and everything had been smashed and the furniture was turned upside down. Then they pulled me out of bed and tore my nightdress to shreds. I was so self-conscious as a 15-year-old. Then they started smashing up the rest of the place. Then they left to smash up someone else's house. It was then that life as I had known it stopped.
Freddie Noller, Vienna.
Suddenly, we heard a woman's shrill voice, a screaming voice, and we heard the glass of a window breaking. We heard a thud in the courtyard. We looked down and saw a body lying there. We didn't know who it was until the woman, Mrs. Epstein, from the first floor, came running into the courtyard, screaming and going to her husband's body.
Siegfried Rose, Borna.
They broke down the bolted apartment door and threatened us with their revolvers, forcing us to unlock the entrance door to the family shop and open all the shutters and windows. All the display windows were immediately smashed and the goods pulled out. Meanwhile, my uncle and I were held in the store and beaten with a broken chair until our heads were bloody.
Hetty Epstein, Kippenheim.
At school the next day, the principal walked in and gave a long talk. At some point, as talking, he pointed his finger at me and said, "Get out, you dirty Jew." I heard what he said, but I couldn't believe it. How could this nice man, this gentle man, whose daughter was one of my classmates, how could he have said that?
November 1938. I think it was November 11th, when it was Kristallnacht. And my grandmother and I were sleeping in the same room. As a matter of fact, we shared the bed. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, the police came in and woke us all up and took us to the police station. And after that, everything changed. Everything became very bad. My father and all the men in the town were taken to the concentration camp. We didn't know where they were. At least I didn't know. Maybe my mother did, but I didn't know where he was. And we were sent back home in the morning, and my mother and grandmother and me. And then we didn't realize that everybody, all the Jewish families in the town had gone through that, until we heard what was going on. And then the store that we had, they had smashed everything over there. They had smashed things in our house. And it was very frightening And after that, the people who we knew before, who were not Jewish, were not friendly to us anymore.
More than 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and sent to Sachsenhausen, Buchenwald, or Dachau concentration camp, and held there for several weeks or months. These are the memories of some of those prisoners. Karl Schwab, Buchenwald.
We stood there all day for no apparent reason, always lining up again, being inspected by SS men, old, ill people collapsing, beatings. On that day, we were given nothing to eat or drink. That was my first day in Buchenwald. Many similar ones followed. I cannot and do not want to describe all the details. It was a series of endless physical and mental sufferings.
Stephen Dale, Sachsenhausen.
It was no picnic in Sachsenhausen. Our clothing was taken and carefully marked with names. Then we were given a striped uniform and marched off to a block. When we slept on the floor, each with a blanket, we couldn't lie on our backs, only sideways because there wasn't enough room. There were 2 roll calls a day, and in that cold weather, you had to stand for ages.
Kurt Lederer, Buchenwald.
10,000 distraught, helpless people were being pumped into a camp that was already overcrowded. People were sleeping. No, my God, they couldn't sleep. They lay next to one another, on top of one another, in unfinished shacks. They couldn't wash themselves. They couldn't wash their linen. Everyone in the camp got dysentery. I cannot and will not describe how people looked and stank. It was hell.
Karl Hecht, Buchenwald.
I saw dead men being carried away every day. In the course of 2 months, about 1,000 people died. This was no wonder, since neither doctors nor medicines were on hand. The ill were put in a wash house, got pneumonia, and died. Others, if they did not die from mistreatment, committed suicide by running into the barbed wire. This occurred on a daily basis.
George Abraham, Sachsenhausen.
Inmates who became sick were very badly treated. There was only one SS doctor, and he had his own special way of treating inmates with frozen hands and feet. After standing for hours in front of the sick bay, he would send them away with a kick. And then they got another punishment. They had to stand for 6 hours or more at the entrance gate.
Most German Jews survived the Kristallnacht pogrom, but their hopes and dreams were over. Many of their non-Jewish friends had watched as Jewish homes were damaged and their synagogues burned. German Jews only then realized that they were not considered equal in their society. The Kristallnacht pogrom was the beginning of the horrible destruction that would face Jews throughout Europe during the next 6 years. It was a symbol and a sign of the tragedy that was to come. I Am a Jew was written by a Jewish boy named Franta Bass when he was 11 years old. After 3 years at Theresienstadt, he perished with his family in Auschwitz at the age of 14.
I am a Jew, and I will be a Jew forever. Even if I die from hunger, never will I submit. I will always fight for my people, on my honor. I will never be ashamed of them. I give my word. I'm proud of my people, how dignified they are. Even though I am oppressed, I will always come back to life.
Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. George Santayana, The Life of Reason, 1905.
As Jews, we mark time. An interesting custom originated in Krakow in 1655.
One of the more elaborate minhagim of the Alta Shul in Krakow was on Simchat Torah, Firstly, a chuppah was brought to the home of the chief rabbi, under which he was paraded to the entrance of the Alta Shul. Once they arrived, they would change the set and go into a state of semi-mourning. They would extinguish the torches that people were carrying. Then the celebrations of Simchat Torah would continue until the Hakafot, processions. During the fourth Hakafa, the joy would be stopped again and the atmosphere returned to mourning. All would sit on upturned benches and recite kinot, laments, after which the joy and celebration would be resumed. This was a remembrance of the Simchat Torah in 1655, when students from Krakow University came to start a pogrom by crashing into the synagogue.
Just as we internalize the memory of this date, November 9th, 1938, Kristallnacht, Night of Broken Glass, we ponder, how will we remember and mark October 7th, 2023, Simchat Torah, 5784. May we all be safe, and Am Yisrael Chai.
Am Yisrael Chai.
Am Yisrael Chai.
Am Yisrael Chai.